Sharon is not going to be coming. So, yeah. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call our meeting to order. We have our behavioral health meeting this morning. Thank you all for being here. I recognize that there are many places that we can be, and I know there's a bill signing this morning, and so I appreciate everyone being here to be able to hear from our families of some of our kiddos who experience SED. So thank you all for making this a priority. I really appreciate it. Madam Clerk, would you call the roll?
Chair Braybeck.
Here.
Representatives Arbit.
Here.
Pahutsky.
Here.
Glanville.
Present.
Edwards.
Here.
McDonald. Reingans.
Here.
Schmaltz.
Here.
Bodley.
Here.
St. Germain.
Here.
Thompson.
Here.
Madam Chair, you have 10 members present. You do have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I really appreciate it. Representative Pahutsky moves to approve the minutes from our March 23rd meeting. Thank you, Rep. Pahutsky. Now, I am very excited because we have a group of folks here from our Advocates for Mental Health for My Youth. They are a newer group. And we're very excited to have them here to share kind of both their lived experiences, but also some suggestions for solutions. Michelle Massey Barnes is one of the co-founders and co-directors of that group, and Laura Marshall is an independent advocate. We also have family members who are here and on Zoom who will be sharing their stories with us. We're doing this so that all of us here on the committee have an idea of what some of our families live with and through and navigate on a daily basis so that it gives us an idea as we're thinking about our mental health care system as a whole, what this kind of sliver of the spectrum looks like and as it's important in our consideration of policies. So I'd love to welcome you both up and I know that you will be, please come on up. Be able to introduce our families who are with us as well. But I know that Ms. Massey Barnes, you're kicking us off here.
Thank you so much for having us today. Thank you to everyone for listening to our stories and the work that we're doing. My name is Michelle Massey Barnes. I live in Jackson County. I am a co-founder of our grassroots parent advocacy group, and I'm also the mother of a now newly young adult who has what the state of Michigan calls severe emotional disturbance, or SED. There's actually a special Medicaid waiver for children with SED. It's called the SED waiver, and it is a waiver that sort of states without intensive services and supports, these children would need to be hospitalized or institutionalized. So these are children that have pretty intensive needs. They're not children that have low to moderate mental health needs. Their needs are more persistent and chronic, which I think you will hear in the stories that we share today. We are families that know what it means to live in crisis. Not just once, not just twice, but over and over and over again for months and years on end. We are also families that are accustomed to being told that there's no help, and because we're all here together in this group, we are accustomed to advocating for it anyway. We started our private Facebook group just over a year ago, and we now have over 520 parents in our group, and it grows every month. We have connected a number of families, I think about 24 or 25 families to different state reps, about 20 state reps in the last 3 weeks. Some of you are on this committee. Thank you to those of you who have already connected with their families and have tried to help. I know it's hard for you to navigate the system as well. The truth is that we cannot keep up with the stories that come in. We can't keep up with the police for help. We can't keep up with the level of crisis. Our Facebook group, every day we read things like, please help, I'm in the emergency room. My child is trying to kill me. My child is trying to kill his or herself. They want to send us home. How do we get a second opinion? They're telling me there's no way to get one. What do I do? Please help. Community Mental Health just did an inpatient pre-screen over Zoom, and my child was so aggressive that he had to be sedated, and he couldn't pick his head up off the floor for the pre-screen, and so the assessor said, "There's no crisis, he's sleeping. Please help. What kind of locks can I put on the inside of my younger children's doors so my older child doesn't wake up in the middle of the night and hurt them or kill them? Please help. What do I do? How do I do this?" It's overwhelming, but we've also lived it. And so how do we not listen? And how do we not try to connect these parents to someone who will listen to them? We hear so many stories, but we're not hearing all of the stories. And I think it's really important to let you know that you aren't hearing all of the stories either. Our group is mostly moms, although we also have some really cool dads and relatives and families, extended families that are supporting families in need, which is amazing. We have a lot, the moms that are coming and speaking to you today are moms that are white, but the children that we're advocating for, even in our own group, are not predominantly white. And we know that these struggles, especially in the Medicaid system, are more disproportionately affecting children and families of color. They're not always the ones that are coming to our private Facebook group. We aren't getting families in general that don't have internet access. We aren't getting families that have English as their second language and they're not as fluent in social media. We aren't connecting with the families that are working 2 or 3 jobs trying to manage crisis and make ends meet and don't have time to search Facebook for private Facebook groups to help them learn how to advocate. So although the stories that you're going to hear today are very real, and I tell all of our families that every story is important, I do think it's worth stepping back and realizing that not all of the stories are being heard, and the ones that aren't being heard are just as important as the ones that you are hearing. One of the other reasons you aren't hearing about stories is because families are very afraid of retaliation. And that's where I want to tell you a little bit about my personal story, because the retaliation is real. In many ways, I feel like I am a good person to take the risk of being retaliated against because we also have private insurance. So if something goes wrong, which it did, we can fall back on Blue Cross Blue Shield. My husband is a teacher. We have MESA. I'm told over and over again it's one of the best insurance plans in the state of Michigan, and I can tell you that I've gotten access to mental health care that my friends in this group and that my friends across the nation have not. So I'm really fortunate in that regard. We have been filing complaints for almost 3 years. That is when our child first started on an SED waiver. Even when complaints were substantiated, nothing changed. The complaints are investigated at the local level, and it seems to be a shuffle of paperwork that is stamped and dated and most of the time responded to timely, and then it disappears. It seems like families are forever being offered whatever community mental health has available to provide and not necessarily what the families need. And therein lies the problem. Last summer, I found out maybe a part of why this was happening. I was told in writing by our wraparound facilitator that they could not request authorization for a service unless they had an available provider. It was the way the software system was set up. I was horrified because what I heard them telling me was they were making determinations about care not based on medical necessity, but based on provider availability. And because I'm one of those moms who reads the Medicaid manual for fun, it's really not very fun. I know that network adequacy is part of their contract. This is what they're supposed to be providing. And I also know we're in the middle of a provider shortage. How do we work together on that? We'll hopefully get to that at the end. So I reported this I filed a grievance. I reported it to MDHHS, And because I'm a mom who stands up and advocates, I also got together a whole bunch of friends and a couple state representatives, and we all went to a Lifeways board meeting and spoke during public comment. The public comment lasted about 45 minutes, and it seems like it wasn't super appreciated because after 3 years of having services in my home every week with no concerns, I started getting reported to Child Protective Services. The first report was, it didn't open, but the first report was that I was not providing medical care to my daughter. What had happened was we had a crisis clinician out to our house, and our daughter told the crisis clinician that we didn't let her manage her diabetes. Our daughter doesn't have diabetes. She did have finger prick lancets in her room, and because the safety plan says no sharps, I removed the finger prick lancets from her room. She had a box of 100. But the crisis clinician created a safety plan for her to check her blood sugar every morning and to call the crisis clinician and to check in, and she was coached on how to manage her diabetes that she doesn't have. But she does skip meals. It's even in her treatment plan that she sometimes can go all day without eating. No one verified this. It kind of spiraled out of control. All of this would have been so easy to have verified, except the clinician that had been working with us in our home for over a year was suddenly removed from our team as soon as all of the CPS investigations and reports started. You can't do that, right? Like you have to give a family an adverse benefits notice and tell them that you're reducing or denying their services. You can't just cut services, but they did. And we were told, I filed a complaint about that too. We were told they didn't have to give us an adverse benefits notice for that clinician because she was a case consultant, which is something that was made up. It really isn't a Medicaid benefit. And she was doing some case consulting, but she was also our family therapist. We were told in our complaint that there was no authorizations that were impacted when she left our team because nothing had been billed. But I can show you a copy of her authorized units, and I have a copy of an EOB that shows her services that were billed. So she's gone. She was the only person in our home for a year. We have a wraparound facilitator. They're supposed to be managing all the care. Sharon was driving an hour away, both directions, to come and meet with our family, and we couldn't get wraparound from our house from Jackson. We were reported to CPS for blocking our daughter from attending wraparound meetings that were scheduled while she was in school. I don't know who made the reports, right? You don't get to know who files allegations of abuse against you. It's to protect the people who are reporting real abuse because we do want to protect children that need help. So even though I can't say who made the report, I can tell you that things could have went very differently. What started happening was I was being set up as this very controlling mother who wanted to, I don't even know what it is that I wanted to do. But they said that I was exaggerating her mental health needs to try to get my daughter inpatient treatment. If you've ever been to the psychiatric emergency room at the University of Michigan, who would sit there? Who would do that to get their kid inpatient treatment that didn't need it? So although I don't know who made this allegation, I can tell you what Lifeways did not disclose to the CPS investigator. They did not disclose that while my daughter was on an inpatient unit, she cut up a bed sheet and she made a noose, and the inpatient unit called me and said that she was attempting to hang herself. Medication changes were very, very difficult for her, and things sometimes got really bad before they got better. It was not reported to CPS that she still has scars up and down her arm from self-harming, and it was not reported to CPS the number of mornings that we were afraid to open her bedroom door, not knowing what we would find. It was instead supported that I exaggerate her mental health conditions like it's some kind of weird hobby. So what happened next was false allegations just spiraled out of control. Lifeways would not address the false allegations. There were no interventions added to the treatment plan, even though these kind of false allegations that my daughter was making were very consistent with the kind of diagnoses that she has, like classic symptoms. We would sometimes meet with professionals for a neuropsych evaluation, and this really compassionate psychologist, he said to us within 5 minutes, wow, this is classic personality disorder. You guys need help. How do we stop the splitting that's happening on your team? Splitting is when you have one set of people saying one thing and another saying another, and they're pitted against each other. But this was her mental health care providers from the public mental health side of things pitted against the parents and the providers from the Blue Cross side of things. She would say she never had an ADOS. It was in her chart. She would say she didn't call the crisis line when I said that she did. There's phone records. All we had to do was look at the phone records. She would say we don't let her leave the house between 9 and 5. I don't even know how to respond to that. That's not even true. These were concerns that the CPS investigator was bringing to us and saying the department was concerned about. I don't know which department, but these were concerns that were never addressed with us as parents or as her team, but they were important enough to the investigation that they were being reported directly to the investigator. We were told that we don't let her eat out of the community fridge, and that was concerning. Community fridge? We don't use that term in our house. So if my daughter was reporting that we don't let her eat out of the community fridge, I would like to know who taught her that terminology. There are 2 things we don't let her eat. We don't let any of our kids eat. We have 3 kids. We don't let any eat. One is my soy-free mayonnaise, because soy makes my stomach hurt. So I have a little tiny thing of soy-free mayonnaise that is just Mom's. And I also have, they're not awesome. I also have dairy-free, soy-free, vegan, plant-based protein bars that I eat when I'm hiking, because soy makes my stomach hurt. So those are the only 2 things my kids can't eat that are in the community fridge. Then the CPS investigator said, okay, but you make her pay for gas money when you take her back and forth to work. And we were like, wow. We had the wraparound facilitator at our house who facilitated a family meeting where we told our daughter, we want you to have this job. We want to support you in this job, but we also want you to make some positive contributions to the family. Here's a list of chores. They were easy chores. 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes. You don't have to do these chores if you don't want to. If you would rather pay us a tank of gas for driving you back and forth, that's fine if you don't want to do chores. We want a positive family contribution. She said, I don't want to do chores. I want to pay you gas money. We have a signed contract. And yet, that's what gets reported to Child Protective Services, that we force her to pay for gas money. So all of this was spiraling out of control. Our CLS staff quit when these allegations started because they said, we're going to be next. Shouldn't have any CLS staff yet left. And so
Ms. Massey Barnes, can you explain what CLS is for folks?
Yes, I sure
Thank
can.
You.
There's so many things that we take for granted because it's our everyday life, and then we realize, we look on people's faces and we're like, wow, this is not normal. CLS is community living support. It's one-to-one support, and it helps kids get out into the community, have positive experiences in the community, be included, have the help that they need to get to and from these places and involved. Because we know that when kids have a community, their outcomes are better. But now she doesn't have any staff, so they just stopped filling her hours. She'd been going to a horse farm. She loves horses. She's like a horse whisperer. She'd been going to a horse farm an hour away for over a year, and her services to get to and from that horse farm stopped, just like that. But then she got told it's a parenting responsibility to go to and from that horse farm. Your mom should be taking you. So then what happened was she didn't have any staff and she couldn't get to the horse farm. So we were reported to Child Protective Services for failing to provide her medically necessary treatment, which, if you have medically necessary treatment written into a plan of service, transportation is a Medicaid entitlement. So they weren't providing transportation. They cut her CLS services. She couldn't get there and back anymore, and then they blamed me for not taking her. What you have to understand is she blamed me too. I don't know if our relationship will ever recover from that. That was the one place where she belonged. She fit in. She was helping run a homeschool program. She was adored there. It was taken from her and then blamed on me. I can't tell you everything that went into this report. It was 52 pages long. There's no way I can, right? There's no way I can tell you the whole story. We were constantly inquiring about partial hospitalization and residential treatment. I don't know who we were constantly talking to, because at this point we didn't like Lifeways at all and didn't want to talk to them really ever. So we were talking to them as little as possible, but somehow we were constantly making all these inquiries that Blue Cross and Blue Shield would have been authorizing and paying for, not Lifeways. What makes me the most angry about that statement, that we were constantly inquiring about these services, is no one reported to Child Protective Services that between mid-July and mid-September, our daughter racked up almost $17,000 worth of crisis calls and crisis response. To me, that says that this child's in crisis, and maybe a higher level of care is warranted. So this is part of the reason why you don't hear some of these stories from families. We had one mom who was going to speak today whose attorney said, don't do it, the risks are too high. So I'm telling you this because the risks are high for all of the families that are speaking and stepping forward. And I think it's important for you to know that as you're helping us advocate for services and as you are really kind of considering how much bravery goes into the stories that families are sharing. Laura's going to tell you next about her experience. She entered the system from a different angle. I think when you start to stack these 4 stories together, you will start to see the ways that the systems collide. You would think that when there's so many systems involved, it would be really easy to get help, but it's actually a giant tangled mess. Every time you put another system in place, there's another set of unspoken rules and almost impossible pitfalls to navigate. So Laura, with that, I'm going to hand it over to you and let you tell your system story. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to allow me to share. So yes, I am Laura Marshall. I am also one of the co-founders for the group. And just a brief background on me, not to bore you, but so I also have 3 children, kind of a little oddball. My oldest son is biological. My middle son is adopted, and he's the one that has the most challenges, and that's the one you're going to be hearing the most about. And then, surprise, God has a sense of humor. I was blessed with a 3rd child, so my second biological. So my adopted son is sandwiched in the middle there. So we brought our son home in 2009 from Ethiopia. And it was very evident right from that initial meeting that there were going to be challenges. I was familiar with adoption. I had done some homework, had heard the stories that get largely glossed over about, well, there's this thing out there called reactive attachment disorder, but it's so rare, whatever. Don't even worry about it. Well, at 14 months, I have this beautiful little boy who goes from one tantrum to the next, just screaming, raging. And I'm trying to comfort my 14-month-old son and trying to hold him to me like you would. You know, you want to rock them, comfort them. And he is pushing back with all his might and just pounding me with his little fists. And I can't make eye contact with my 14-month-old son. So, excuse me, right from the start, it was like, okay, we are blessed with something a little more challenging than we were planning on. Who plans for parenthood, really, realistically? We didn't get the parenting handbook on any of them. So very quickly, I started trying to get answers and get some help. I first went right back to the adoption agency that we had used and said, what can you advise? Like, this child just has this level of anger. I understand he's terrified. He doesn't really truly know us. And they very kindly gave me about 8 different options. And then as a little caveat at the end, shared with me, if any of those actually happen to work out for you, would you please call us back and let us know which ones? I was like, okay, click. No, I'm sorry, I don't have time to figure out which ones work. So that was one of my first experiences with trying to actually get help. Next was an organization called AFSN, Adoptive Family Support Network. They have been consistent through our parenting journey. They have been a phenomenal resource. They're like real parents who've done all the things, who've had the challenges and tried, and they don't have all the answers either, but they're real life. And in some of those lowest points, I've actually had a staff member literally sit next to me in my home and help me remember how to breathe. I know that sounds very melodramatic, but you hit those lows when you don't know how to keep your child and your family safe. It's terrifying. But through AFSN and all the things that they offer, I went through a parent-to-parent leadership training back in 2015. I was introduced to some super therapeutic parenting styles. It's not intuitive kind of parenting, and have had extensive training. It's called TBRI, Trust-Based Relational Intervention. These aren't the type of things that neurotypical families and parents have heard of. These are the kind of things that I am grasping for. I need help. I need to do better for my son. I want our family to thrive and to be okay, and I want my son to be able to have good, healthy relationships with someone, even if it ends up not being me. It's not an ego thing. I just want him to have a future and be okay. So at the age of 8, as a 3rd grader, we had an incident where our son had been repeatedly, repeatedly suspended from school. And he had just returned back to school that day, and I got a call from the school, and they said, I'm sorry, he got really aggressive again, hurt another student, threw a chair, broke a window, whatever the thing was. You need to come pick him up. And I pulled over on the side of the road, and I sat and I cried, because I'm like, he just returned to school. Oh, my stars. So I didn't know what to do. I didn't really know about community mental health at that point. We were going to individual independent counseling. We did attachment therapy for 4 solid years, every single week for 4 solid years. So I'm giving you some of this backstory so that you know that I am sincere when I say I have done what I can to find answers and to get help for my son. I'm not the type that just sits back and it'll fix itself. I don't believe that for a second. So anyway, ended up having to take him to DeVos Children's Hospital. We live in the Greater Grand Rapids area. And so they held him in ER for about 24 hours or so, and then actually did give him a room with a safety attendant, which we were like, hey, this is great. And we talked with, at the time, the on-staff psychiatrist. And the on-staff psychiatrist listened to me, took notes. The social worker seemed to really be paying attention. And I felt like, okay, you know, this is going to be a good outcome. Like, we're going to fix it now, and then we're going to move forward from here. Things I heard while I was sitting in ER before they gave us a room were the sitters out in the hallway, or the safety attendants out in the hallway saying, oh, here's our next frequent flyer family. Ouch, okay, you know, great. I'm like, that's not going to be me. I'm not a frequent, I'm going to work with you people, you're going to work with me, we're going to fix it, and he's going to be good. So about 7 days or so in to his being there, we visited every day, myself or my husband. Sorry. I went to visit him again, like normal, and we're told, we're discharging your son home today. And I said, whoa, stop right there. What are you talking about? Again, this is, you know, he's like 8, he's a 3rd grader. What are you talking about? You've taken him off all of his medication. And the on-staff psychiatrist looked me in the eye and said, well, your son currently has a diagnosis of pediatric bipolar. I don't believe in that. So we got him off the wrong meds, and we're sending him home. And I said, okay, no. I am going to dispute that because I have 2 other children in my home that I need to also ensure are safe. And you've taken him off all of his meds to help him stabilize and reduce aggression. And she said, if you don't take your son home today, I absolutely will report you to CPS for child abandonment. So that was the first official time I was threatened with child abandonment. And I looked at her probably with the like deer in the headlights. Okay. So the only thing I could do was literally ship my other 2 children up to my parents for a month while we worked with our independent psychiatrist to get him up and stabilized on different medication. They wouldn't allow us to stay in the hospital setting to try to get him on new meds and get him stabilized before coming home. We had to literally take him home that day. That was actually, they sent me home with a list and said, oh, we've been trying to get a bed for him at Pine Rest or Hawthorne or what have you, but you know, there are no beds available. But here, take this list home with you and you can continue calling to see if you can find placement for him. So obviously we took him home, and the next morning I found myself terrified and literally unable to breathe, which was when someone actually from AFSN, I forgot she was coming over. And I was like, I don't think you want to come in the house right now. I'm a train wreck. And she's like, I think you need me to sit here and just be with you. I will never forget that. Like, I don't know what a panic attack is, but I'm pretty sure that was me having one. Anyway, I'm sorry I rabbit hole. I try not to. So anyway, moving forward, we, at that point, did get involved with community mental health. So getting involved with community mental health, I'm like, this is the history of what we've tried. Therapeutic parenting, we've tried this, we've tried that. We've been doing the attachment therapy. And so they said, okay, well, we'll get started with in-home therapy. I was like, that's awesome. You come to us. That's nice. So that is one thing they do well. If you can get a therapist that is a good match for your family, it's really great to have them come to you. We also started with wraparound services, and I was so excited because wraparound services were based on this SED waiver, the serious emotional disturbance waiver that Michelle had talked about. There is this host of things that like you can get one-to-one respite, like overnight respite for your child, and you can get the CLS, the community living services, and more hours of therapy and different kinds of therapy. And I was like, this is amazing. So here in my mind, we have this son who is really aggressive. Like if I could do a reset, if I could utilize this respite, like once a month for maybe a long weekend where I don't have to ask a family member or a friend and risk their house being torn up or someone getting injured, if I could utilize respite with trained staff in a safe facility, this is phenomenal. Like, And then he would come back home after a couple days. I've had a break, fresh, ready to go. We tried it once, and we got a call about 3 days in, 2-3 days in, said, please come pick up your child. He's too aggressive to be here. I said, excuse me? He's at respite because of aggression. How can he be too aggressive to be there? And they said, well, he's throwing chairs at staff and he's intimidating some of the other children that are staying here. Okay. So this is what we live with. Well, we're not equipped to handle that. So until your son's aggression issues resolve, he cannot come back to this respite facility. Okay. Well, you also mentioned crisis respite. So we'll do the same thing. There's not near as many hours because the staffing is more intense, but we'll utilize crisis respite. Again, we just need that break just every once in a while to recharge and then jump back in. Oh, no, he's not severe enough for crisis. Okay, he's too aggressive for your regular respite, but he can't go to crisis. This isn't making any sense to me. But they held firm, and we never once were able to utilize a crisis respite. Never once. So we did have therapy. We attempted to utilize CLS. CLS workers change pretty frequently. I think a lot of it is it's kind of an entry-level position with a lot of CMHs, and the pay is not phenomenal, so they don't stick around very long. But for us, it was definitely getting him out in the community and learning some of those social skills, but also some of the skills of just functioning within the home. Like, how do I interact with my siblings and not get into a physical, aggressive argument every time? How do I respond when my parents ask me to brush my teeth? Do I punch another hole in the wall, or do I maybe just go brush my teeth? And it's, with all the different diagnoses that my son had, it was literally living on this eggshell level of anything we say to him directly, any kind of direction, whether it's simple, please wash your hands. Hey, it's a beautiful day outside. You want to go outside and play? If it wasn't something in his mind that he wanted to do, you didn't know what you were going to get. You literally could get ignored, or it could absolutely explode into this just huge, I think his bedroom wall currently has like a 5 by 3 foot hole in it from where he busted through a wall, I think because we asked him to carry his basket of clean laundry upstairs to his room. It just didn't really matter. Any type of directive from us. He was just absolutely in a fury. We did try music therapy for over a year with him. It just wasn't really effective for him. They suggested art therapy, but my son has been very noted to struggle with the fine motor skills. So handing him a pencil and telling him to write something or draw something is going to trigger him. We're like, let's not go that route because I'm not wanting to ask for more explosive behavior. So as the years go on, we've had food behavior issues to the point where we've had medical, like he went through about a 3-year period where he would just make himself vomit. It's not anorexia or bulimia. It's more of a control thing. It's pretty common with children that have reactive attachment disorder that the 1 or 2 things that they can figure out that they can control, they will control however they can, even if it's a really unhealthy way. But we tried to go the extra mile and make sure that it's not really truly something medical. So we had like swallow studies done, eating therapy, an upper GI, everything checks out, and it truly was behavioral. So then we would go back to, community mental health, be like, we need more help with the food issue. And I would have the therapist look me in the eye and say, he's just a small, that's just his body type. Not true. So again, the years go on. This past December culminated in, he had been sitting in juvenile detention for 6 months. Now, I know I'm jumping way ahead, But through all of this, we've consistently been asking for help. We've had these wraparound teams, and we're asking for a greater level of service, greater level of support for him, and just like Michelle was saying, based on medical necessity, and yet community mental health just repeatedly denying us the level of help anywhere close to what our son truly needs. Again, with the SCD waiver, he actually qualifies technically at the level of being placed in Hawthorne or something similar with 24/7 care. But in the home, they're telling me that 3 hours a week of respite in a group setting where you drive him a half an hour into town is going to be sufficient. And I'm like, well, then why are we constantly in crisis? Why is this aggression not getting better? If what you're providing is so sufficient, why are we so unsafe in our home all the time? We had to install locks on all of our doors. My youngest son, who was very frequently a target of the aggressive behavior, was taught when this stuff starts, you go to a room that you can lock, a bathroom, your bedroom, the downstairs room, you lock the door. You do not open that until a safe adult lets you know it's okay to come back out. So it became a thing where we would call the crisis line, because you talk to any CMH and they'll tell you, we have 24/7 crisis. You call us, we help. No, they don't. You call them and they say, oh, well, you already have services through such and such, so call that service provider. Well, they don't do crisis mobile. Well, call them, because they need to help you. Okay, so you call them and they'll talk to you on the phone and be like, well, can I talk to your son? Sure, I could hand him my phone if I want to get hit with it, as it very quickly becomes a projectile right back at me. Crisis Mobile has, flat out said, no, I'm sorry, we only offer services between like 9 and 6. I'm so sorry my son's aggressive episode isn't between your very convenient business hours. I should really talk to him about that. So anyway, it became very quickly, with the level of safety concerns that we have no other choice. We're calling the police over and over. Like, we're really familiar with the police in our community. We can walk through the grocery store and my husband will be like, hey, remember that police officer? He came about 3 times. And I'm like, just stop, please. So in my journey to try to understand the system better, I did actually work for Network 180. That's the CMH in my district. I worked with Network 180 for 2 years as a parent support partner, using my lived experience and the things that we were going through as a way to hang on to a thread of hope for myself and to reach out to other families, and also to learn the system from the inside. And I learned a lot in those 2 years. And then I ended up actually taking a job with ACMH and learning that connection between like MDHHS and training parent support partners through that job. So I know a lot about the ins and outs and how it's all supposed to work. I know the theories. The family-driven youth guided is a really big, you're training in parent support partner stuff. It's family-driven youth guided. And there is a model for wraparound, and you need to serve these families and support these families through wraparound in fidelity to the model. Unfortunately, I can tell you that the people that came and sat in my home at my table and looked at me and told me that they were supporting me were not providing in fidelity to the model. They start from the very basic point of, what are you doing wrong as a parent? I'm talking about huge holes in the walls of my house. I'm talking about a child who literally threw a double mattress size box spring down the stairwell at me. I know it sounds exaggerated. I have pictures. I won't subject you to that. I have pictures, and they would say, have you tried making a chart for him that you can help him identify his emotions? Yeah, I did that when he was like 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 and 9. We did house rules. We did all these things. Have you talked to him about deep breathing? Yup, I have. But when I have testing done that shows that my son goes from 0 to fury in 3 seconds, I need to be able to see that, register it, and say, take a deep breath. But he's already swinging at 3 seconds. And this is not just a parent that's given up hope. I refuse to give up hope on my son. I will not. I did not bring that child from Ethiopia to be in my family and to be my son, to give up hope on him. I will not do it. One of the systems I wanted him to be the farthest from ever was the criminal justice system. But I sat in Network 180's Access Center and talked to a former supervisor of mine and said, why can't you help us? Why won't you help us? And she said, you're in the juvenile justice system now. They have a bigger bucket of funding and they have a bigger bucket of options. You need to just go with them. So my son, who has mental health challenges and has had them since the day we met him, it's so well documented. Do I have all the answers for it? Obviously not. Do I expect one person to have the magical cure? I'm not a fool. No, I don't. But do I expect people in this field to continue to try to do their best and to work and support my son? I do. Do I ever expect or accept that someone in that system that's getting a paycheck for supporting families like mine can look me in the eye and say, criminalize your son? No, I'm sorry. I'm not sorry. I don't accept it. It's wrong. It's unethical. And the services and supports they provide need to be revamped in a serious way because this absolutely needs to stop. Okay, sorry, I need to chill a little bit. Okay. So in the middle of all this, I also have partnered with a woman named Marianne Huff. Most of you probably heard of her. She works for MHAM. She's the director. And she actually went to bat trying to help me as well. Like, she joined in before courts got involved. She joined in trying to help me advocate for my son. Again, quoting that Medicaid manual. And these are the things that are available. And these are the things that your CMH signed on the line, federal contract, they need to provide. And I said, okay, let's go. Let's do this. We got nowhere. They just continued to push back and said, well, we don't have providers. That's not our problem. You still need to put it in. You put the authorization in the IPOS, the individual plan of service, and then you work at finding them, and I could possibly try to do a self-determination budget, and I could possibly try to find people to staff these services. But we got nowhere with our CMH. They kept fighting back and, well, we just don't know. We have to justify it. No, you don't have to justify it. The fact that he has an SED waiver speaks to the medical necessity of the services that we are legitimately asking for. So again, I'm not here on behalf of NHAM, but I do actually now serve on the board because, again, I'm trying to understand it from the inside. I'm trying to understand how it works and what angles I can approach this from appropriately to try to change the system for the better. For all of these kids, absolutely yes. For my son, but for all these kids who need the support that someone out there is getting paid for and they're claiming they're providing, but it's not happening. No child should have to be sent to sit in juvenile detention for 6 months. So after 6 months, the judge decided, well, he's not safe to go home, but you don't get any services. You don't get therapy. It's not like a rehabilitation situation. It's kid jail. What's that going to do to help my son's mental health? So the judge finally determined that he needed to be placed in a program. So he's in a program called Rite of Passage. So a child that has reactive attachment disorder, which means one of his primary struggles is with that, like, personal relationship with family, is now in the state of Wyoming. So I'm not really sure how you guys feel how that's going to work out with us being able to do that really hard work. I'm not gonna lie, it's hard. He doesn't want to do it. There are times I don't want to do it either. But I'm not gonna give up. But it's really, really hard when the only option that we have at this point is about a half an hour once a month on Zoom. And at some point, I really, really hope the things that they are working on, because there is a bit of a therapeutic component to it. So I'm hoping that maybe he can work through some issues in this regard, to some of the behavioral pieces, and maybe the break from us will help when he gets back home. But I still have that fear when he comes back home, who's going to step in and support us then? Because I have no faith at this point that community mental health is going to do the right thing. And from day one, the only thing, when it comes down to everything, like sitting here talking to you, putting together this advocacy group, the only thing I really, truly wanted at the very core is just for somebody to help me help my son. That's really all I wanted. And I think I've taken up way too much of your time now, but thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Ms. Marshall. Colleagues, I want to offer some space for any questions that people might have. I know we have a couple more folks. We also need to be mindful that we have a hard stop at 10:25. But Rep. Glanville, you want to start us off?
Thank you, Chair. And I'm not sure this is a question that can be answered in this moment, but I just want to flag that I need a little bit more background information on the systems they're talking about. So as they're talking about this SED, I forget what it's called, and the waiver, and like it's very unclear to me what the continuum of care is here. Like how did they get into this system? What is this system? How does it connect to Lifeways? Which I was trying to look online. What is Lifeways? So I've been busily following what you're talking about and trying to kind of figure it out as you're going along. But for my part, I know I could use a lot more of that background information in order to help contextualize this whole story. And thank you so much to both of you for sharing your very personal and obviously painful stories.
That's really good feedback. We live this, right? And we tried to say, okay, we've got to go way back and take people along with us. And it's really good feedback that it's it also speaks to how complex this whole thing is. And it almost feels like it takes 3 hours to map out the system for someone. And by that point, we need lunch, So thank you. Jessica's going to speak next, and she comes in from a different angle. She's going to talk.
Miss Massey Barnes, I'm sorry, right here.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We have a couple more questions.
Oh,
so
I'm sorry.
I want to be able to get to our colleagues' questions. Unfortunately, we only have a limited amount of time. So we have Rep. St. Germain.
Thank you for sharing your stories. I just have one quick question for Michelle. You mentioned your daughter made $17,000 in crisis calls. What do you mean by that?
Well, there's a crisis line. So Lifeways is the community mental health. That's their name. She would call and say, I'm in crisis. And when we would call and say, hey, we need crisis help, they weren't coming out to our house, so I had to file grievances. But when she would call, they would show up, oftentimes unannounced. They wouldn't even let us know she was in crisis. Sometimes they would show up with police officers and tell us, your daughter's in crisis. And we're like, she's been in her bedroom quiet for the last 2 hours. It would have been nice to have known. So those services, they're billed services, right? So every time a crisis clinician was sent to our house, or every time a crisis clinician was taking a phone call, it was just a billed Medicaid service. So when I got the EOB, I just kind of went through and added up all of the dollar amounts that were associated with the crisis response and inpatient pre-screens that I didn't even know were happening, and services like that.
Sure. Minority Vice Chair Schmaltz.
Thank you, madam. I just want to say thank you so much for coming and telling us your stories. This is how we learn from people who have to try and navigate the system. And thank you for advocating for your children. I appreciate that. I worry a lot about the kids who don't have people who advocate for them like this. There's a lot to go through here. There's a lot to fix. I really appreciate you coming in and letting us know what's happening. And hopefully we can have further conversations. But that's why we're here. We're here to listen to you and to fix this. So thank you so much.
Rep. Reinkens.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for being here today and sharing your story. I have heard from some constituents. Part of my district includes Jackson County, and I have heard from some of my constituents. They ask me, with some increasing mental health issues community-wide here across our state and shortages of staff, why don't we have more people going into institutions and staying there? Like mental hospitals, we used to have so many in Michigan. Why don't we do that? And having worked in the mental health field myself, and my husband's a therapist at a rural hospital in the area, and previously worked for Washtenaw Community Mental Health, we're really proud that our state tries to help people with mental challenges to live in the community and participate and be community members, especially if they can get the supports that they need and deserve. And so I'm curious what you as parents would say to people who are asking, why don't we just institutionalize your family members? And why are we using this community mental health system? I personally believe that people have self-determination regardless of their mental health challenges. So I think they should be able to live in the community with us. And I'm just curious what you think too.
Well, I can say the last thing that I wanted as a mother was for my child to be hospitalized or institutionalized. I wanted that kind of community support that you were talking about. I think that's what has the best outcomes for most people, but you can't say we're going to have a community-based support system to keep children and individuals with disabilities in the community and then not provide the services they need to keep them in the community. So what happens is things escalate to the point where safety can't be maintained, and then you lose all options. Like Laura has explained, and children end up in the juvenile justice system, or parents end up being told to terminate their parental rights and to send them into foster care because they can get an out-of-home placement that way. We don't want our children out of our homes. We want our children to have mental health treatment that's medical treatment so they can be successful in our homes and in our communities. And sometimes I think we're misunderstood when we're advocating for services. We're not advocating for placements away from our families and away from our children. We're advocating for appropriate medical care so our children can come back into our homes and be successful with us.
Thank you, colleagues. I know that Jessica is here. I also know we have a hard stop at 10:25. I'd love to.
It's not a clock in here.
Oh, it's behind you. So it's 10:18 right now.
Okay.
And I know that we had someone on Zoom, and so I want to be respectful of being able to hear their stories as well, as much as we are able to in the very short amount of time that we have left.
Okay.
So I would love if Jessica wants to come up so we can hear a little bit. I'm sorry that we don't have more time, Jessica, but thank you so much for being here. And thank you to Stephanie on Zoom.
Hello. So I'm not going to rehash too much of the lack of support we've gotten, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about my daughter. She will always be my daughter, and she is no longer in my care. So I think a lot of parents on this SED, severely emotional disturbed, you're going to find not all of us, a majority of us come with kids from the adoptive world. And that's because if you think about how much a child develops from in the belly to 5 years old, their brain goes through a lot of development, and these kids were exposed to drugs in utero. These kids were neglected. These kids their brains didn't make the connections they needed to make. So I have 3 adopted children, and once they were adopted in my care, we found out about their sister who was in a group home and was deemed unadoptable at the age of 6 because of her disabilities and her just severe needs. And we did our best. She was stable when we met her, and we did our best to bring her in her home with her siblings. And it went great for 8 months. She went from, at 9 years old, she was in 4th grade, but she couldn't read anything. She went to reading 2nd grade level sight words within the 8 months she lived with us. And things were great, but she needed support, and we begged for support. In December, she sent 4 teachers to urgent care when she got upset because she didn't want to do her schoolwork. We had cops to our house 5 or 6 times because she was assaulting us. She is 9 years old, but she is 5'4", 5'5", and 140 pounds. So she's a big kid, throwing things, tantrums, everything. And what it all really came down to is my daughter needed a med wash. And yes, I don't believe in institutionalizing children, but she wasn't safe in the home. And what a med wash is her medications that stabilize her were not doing their job. Mainly for my daughter's point is because she started her period and her hormones were crazy. And because of that, the meds that used to work did not work anymore. So we spent 3 to 4 months advocating for her to be hospitalized so she can safely do a med wash and come home. We knew exactly what she needed. We told everybody what she needed. And the system doesn't exist because we disinstitutionalized. There was no place that my 9-year-old could go to get this med wash because of her disabilities, because her cognitive disabilities, because of her age, because of her behaviors. So nobody could tell me how I could safely change her meds at home without her hurting her younger siblings, without her hurting me, without any of that happening. Instead, I had 5 investigations from CPS. And I told you my kids all adopted. So they went into my children's schools and talked to them, these CPS investigators, knowing very well my children's disabilities. And my eldest started cutting herself because she was scared she was going to be taken from my home. My youngest 2 didn't sleep, and they were scared they were going to leave. They were also scared their sister was going to leave, but they were scared of their sister, so they really didn't know what was going on. So again and again, they came and they talked to my kids, and they questioned my children. My children know what CPS investigators are. They've been in the system before. They were terrified of being taken away, and so instead of getting help from my family, I had 4 children spiraling instead of 1. I had my eldest cutting, and CMH refused to help my oldest because I already had 2 kids in services in my home. We couldn't handle 3 kids in services. That was too much for us, but I could handle sleeping in our bedroom floor every night to make sure she didn't hurt herself. But I couldn't handle another social worker coming to help her. My 9-year-old ended up kicking her door down in her room, and because we had all the sharp objects, even forks, locked away, and taking the screws from her door and coming at people with them, hiding them in her room. She's back in California now because that's where I'm from. Well, she's from, and her siblings are from. They came to our home when we were in the military out there. My family's in Michigan, so we moved back here. And she just gets sitting in a group home, maybe someday waiting for a placement she'll probably never get. My goal is still to figure out how to bring her back into my home. I've been looking at different states, looking in different areas, seeing where I can bring, but the systems aren't in place here. They have all these community mental health and all these great ideas for it, but all the money is going to dealing with the crises instead of helping the parents who are telling you their kid is going to be in crisis if A, B, C, and D doesn't get done. If my daughter doesn't get into an institution for 3 months to get a med wash. If this and that doesn't happen, these parents know what the child needs for the most part, or know ideas, but they don't have the facilities in place. In order to get your child an inpatient, they have to be concerned that they're going to kill themselves or severely hurt somebody else. But once they get into that inpatient, it's for 4 to 7 days. So you're taking children who get so severe and so much in crisis that they are trying to kill themselves or other people, but you are only letting them go into an institution for 4 to 7 days. I'll tell you, that's not going to do anything for them. And I get that we want them home as much as the system wants them home, but you're wasting money. You're wasting money on these 4 to 7 days treatments. It's not going to help anybody ever if you're waiting until a child gets to crisis and then sending them to a facility for 4 to 7 days to stabilize. All it's going to do is they're going to sit in the facility, and the facility isn't going to have any rules, and they're just going to let them get away with what they want, and then they're going to tell their parents they are stable and send them home. And as soon as the mom tells her to bring your basket upstairs or it's time to go to bed, they're going to put more holes in the walls, and they're going to be back in the facility. So we're wasting all these monies putting Band-Aids on the problem when we really do need institutions that let our kids go for 3 to 6 months to get stabilized, to get the actual therapies they need, and they can come home, because that's what we want too. But the SED waiver to try to keep them home, unless these services can be provided, unless we can get actual music therapy, unless we can get therapies that help with their brains. There's like EMDR therapy that would be really useful for these children, but it's not provided for Medicaid, honestly. You can't find a provider who will do EMDR, who will do any brain mapping, any brain-based therapy with Medicaid, because they can make a lot of money, a lot more money elsewhere. And for my children, they have no other choice but Medicaid, especially my daughter's still in the system. So I want to try to give him room to speak, but I'm just saying that the system is great, and every person I met wanted to help me, Vice's her social worker, but they didn't have the resources, and the resources aren't there because we washed the whole mental health system trying to keep these kids home without thinking of their actual needs, and we're not meeting those actual needs.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. I'm grateful to all of you for coming. Some reps have conversation or have questions. I would invite you to be able to ask folks, since we do have another committee that starts momentarily. But thank you so much. Also, colleagues, we passed out some solutions that the group provided for us to be able to think about as well. So I'm grateful to you all for not only coming and sharing your stories with us, but also providing some ideas for us to think about. So thank you, colleagues. We need to, so let's do Rep. Hoadley moves to excuse absent members. Thank you, Rep. And with that, this meeting is adjourned. Thanks, everybody.